We like to talk about the annual Parsha because that's the one with which people are most familiar. So that's the most productive for our purposes. We introduced this issue with a question for the children. Imagine you were at some sort of ceremony, a signing, the closing of some sort of real estate transaction. Hold on, we got questions coming in. Hi, okay. And you were there, and you saw that Reuven sold this house and field to Shimon in exchange for a flock of animals. Okay, he's giving you a whole flock of animals there. So that was the exchange, and you saw them sign the document, and there were witnesses, and they had a l'chaim afterwards, shook hands, and everybody went home. A week later, suddenly it's the same actors again, same witnesses, same group of people watching this happen, and lo and behold, it's Reuven selling the same property to Shimon. Except this time, the deal seems to be slightly different. Shimon is going to earn the property for services rendered. And then you see them sign contract. They shake hands, have a l'chaim, and everybody goes home. The sale is complete. So you're wondering, okay, it seems a little bit redundant. Did something happen with the first sale? Was it rendered null and void or something like that? Perhaps these are different parties involved. Is Reuven twice selling his field, maybe to two different Shimons? You just didn't recognize him. What's going on here? So you have to investigate. So too, in last week's Parsha, Lech Lecha, if some children might have noticed, oh, look at that. There's two covenants between God and Abraham. I'm going to show you the first one, and then you'll see that the second one seems sort of redundant. It says here that after this war with the four kings, there was a word of the Lord to Abraham in a vision. That's how he introduced this. It means some sort of prophetic vision. And he promised him great reward. And Abraham asked, yeah, but I'm not going to have any children. What's the point? I lost Lot, and all I have is my servant. Is my servant going to be my heir? And God promised, no, you're going to have children. And then God told him that I'm the Lord over here. See, I'm the Lord. I took you out of Ur Kasdim in order to give you this land as an inheritance. Here's your land. So Abraham said, okay, well, how do I know it's mine? On what merit will I earn it? And then it says here that God showed him the sacrifices, how to take these particular animals into the sacrificial service. We've seen this idea in many previous shiurim. And then God also told him about the tribulations. There's going to be an exile and a servitude, and it's going to come to an end eventually. And then the fourth generation, they're the ones who are going to inherit the land. And by then, these rest of the Amorites will be deserving of punishment. Until this point, only the Sodomites have basically lost their lease on the land, but the rest of them are going to have to wait. So it says, in conclusion of this prophetic vision in which Abraham offered sacrifice to God and was given the land of Canaan as an eternal inheritance, it says here, Vayomahu karath Adonai Avram berith lemor. On that day, God cut a deal with Abraham. Cut a deal. L'zaracha nathati et ha'aretz hazoth minahar Mitzrayim ad har agol nehar Perath. To your descendants have I given this land from Nahar Mitzrayim, whichever that may be. We saw them previous shurim. I like the pshat that says it's Wadi El Arish, until the Euphrates River, and it encompasses the territory of all these national groups. So that's the covenant between God and Abraham. God will be our God, which is a deep theological discussion unto itself. And Abraham's children will keep God's Torah. In what sense? They'll keep the sacrificial service. We offer the sacrifices. That gives us the merit to hold on to the land. Now, one could ask, wait a second, what about when there's no sacrifices? And that's the midrash we saw in previous years. If you do not have the capacity to offer sacrifice, so you study the relevant passages, and that works for both an individual and a tzibur, a community. So we actually do that. That's a prominent factor in our prayers and the regular liturgy. Okay, so there you go. That's the covenant. But we go later in last week's parsha, and what do we find? That Abraham was then 99 years old. That's what it says over here. Previously, this first covenant, the one that Chazal called the Brit Bein HaBitharim, was sometime well before Abraham was 75 years old. How do I know that? Well, if you assume, like most do, that the Brit Bein HaBitharim is in context, chronological context, then it was sometime after Abraham made it to the land of Canaan at the age of 75, and before Ishmael was born. Okay, that seems pretty clear, before any children were born. And Ishmael was born, he was 86. My estimation, probably around the time Abraham was 80. Whereas others, in trying to resolve uh, apparently contradictory verses indicating how long this servitude and exile were to last, the 400 years, etc. Rav Surel has a good article about that we should see. Read the Ramban. Different calculations of how those 400 years or 430 years worked out. So they indicate that this covenant between the parts was actually cut between Abraham and God when Abraham was about 70 years old, sometime before he actually received the first commandment, get up and go to Eretz Canaan. In which case you have to explain, so why is this out of place? And not only that, it says, as an introduction to the Brit Bein HaBitharim, it says that it sort of happened afterwards. Achar Hadrim Ha'ela, which is this war with the kings of the east who attacked Sodom and took Lot captive. You'd have to basically say that this message over here, Achar Hadrim Ha'ela, before God started over here, a new speech. Okay? I took you out of Ur Kasdim to give you this land. Somehow there should be a break over here. Okay? This conversation happened after the war, when Abraham was already in the land for quite a while. And then suddenly, without even a space break over here, normally parshas in the Torah indicate different narratives altogether, should say, and previously, a decade before this is what happened between God and Abraham. It doesn't seem to fit. So that's why many do not like that pshat. Either way, we have now, Abraham is now 99 years old, and we get to quite a similar covenant. What do we have over here? That God is saying, I'm going to give my covenant between you and your descendants. And he explains that Abraham will have a new name, and the covenant will be with Abraham's future descendants from this point after, but not with Ishmael. And the child shall be born to Abraham's until this point infertile or barren wife, Sarah, who will now be called Sarah. And the side that Abraham has to keep of this covenant is a different commandment, not the sacrifices, but what? Circumcision. Okay. Over here, God introduces, what is this covenant that you should keep? This covenant is, you have to have all your males circumcised. So now let's get to the question. Previously, God had made a covenant with Abraham himself to give him the land of Canaan forever. And we said that the commandment that the Abraham's descendants have to keep is the sacrifices. And here, it seems, it's the same deal to get the land of Canaan, but lo and behold, it is a different mitzvah entirely. So what's going on over here? By the way, someone asked, well, we do have it that, for example, the Mosaic covenant was cut at Sinai. That was the deal at Sinai. But then they had a second covenant at Horev. Yes, but the terms and conditions were entirely the same. Why was it a secondary covenant? Because it was a new generation. The first generation had accepted this covenant, but sort of abrogated it in their trials in the wilderness and had been found wanting. And their generation was basically condemned to die out and actually not receive the land of Israel, land of Canaan at the time. So that basically had to be renewed. So the next generation, upon preparing to enter the land of Israel, no small print in the agreement. Okay, maybe there was. That's what we're trying to discuss. Those in Horeb, in Arvot Moav, basically they're new people there, so they have to reestablish or reaffirm the previous covenant. But here, this is the same Abraham who, I guess, is just 15 years, or maybe perhaps 30 years or so, whatever your calculation is, after the previous covenant, it's the same Abraham. What is different? What's going on? How do we understand this? And I'd like to offer an explanation over here based on the surrounding psukim in the context to help us understand what was going on. Was this the twice promised land? Was the first covenant abrogated? No, here's how it goes. Abraham had originally fought for this land. What does it say? In this war between the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and the much more powerful kings from the east. Why do I know that? Because it says the kings from the east were kings of basically countries, Elam and Shinar and other places like that. Whereas Sodom and Gomorrah are just city-states, the city with a particular king. So it doesn't seem to be that the people, the kings from Sodom and Gomorrah actually stood a chance against these foreign conquerors. But what these foreign conquerors do, says they came from the east. Of course, they didn't cross directly to the east. There's a gigantic desert. Most of Jordan is like that. Instead, you'd go up northwest in the Fertile Crescent and then come back down southwest through what's today Syria and Lebanon, and then attack the land of Canaan. And it says they had some great conquests heading south, a lot of Avar Yarden, and also the areas south of here in the Negev. It gives them Sodom and Gomorrah were the last stops on this, route of conquest. And Abraham basically took that all away from them. The kings from the east conquered a large part of the ancient land of Canaan, and Abraham took it back. So he was the conqueror. There is even a non-fantastic midrash which says at the time these Canaanite nations came to Abraham and basically said, look, in practice, you are our ruler. Why don't we just make it official and crown you king of this whole country? And he refused at the time. Even though you see later they called him an Nasi Elohim, which means you're a great prince among us or the great leader. Nasi is basically, like we said before, sometimes in the Torah, Nasi means a king. It means someone who has no rank above him. So what's the difference between a Stam and Nasi and a king? A coronation. Right? Sometimes he's everything in practice. We mentioned Joshua and Gideon; those were figures in our history who were basically kings. And even to Gideon himself, the people came to him and said, "We might as well just make this official and hereditary. So why not? You are basically the king." So he refused. Abraham also refused. There's a lot of parallels also between the two characters, especially in Midrash, between Abraham and his famous descendant from Shevet Menashe. Now, Abraham did technically already begin to control the land. So that's what God was promising him, except Abraham was missing something. He did not have an heir. So here God told him, no, you will continue controlling this land. Eventually you will have children, and you offer the sacrifices, and that's how you hold on to it. And that's why the conclusion of the Brit Bein HaBitharim is, over here, a list of all the groups, I said the national groups, that control the land or occupy the land as of then, when Abraham was speaking to God. But eventually it will become the land of the Israelites. So over here, they have to properly define it. Here are the borders, Nahar Mitzrayim to Nahar Perath. And it's the area that is controlled by these groups. If you have a different group, perhaps it's kind of harder to take away land from them. Nafkamina, Edom, Ammon, and Moab, God will eventually say, you don't have the chance to, let's say, aggressively try to take their land from them along the lines that you're supposed to do to these other groups. And of course, you have the Philistines. The Philistines don't fit into this Canaanite group. They come from the sea, so it's kind of harder to deal with them, and they're going to be rivals, especially along the coast later in history. But the point is that here in the Brit Bein HaBitharim, God was promising Abraham the land as an eternal inheritance, not internal, to the exclusion of these other groups that are not qualified to have it. He's a descendant of Shem. These are all descendants of Ham, and their land is supposed to be possessed by Abraham's rightful descendants. That is what the Brit Bein HaBitharim means. Nafkamina la'alacha means the practical consequences of this, that let's say we had a Babylonian exile. Babylonian or Assyrian conquerors come, take away the tribes of Israel, send them into exile in the east. Yes, that does harm the sanctity of the land, as we saw, but it's still always a Jewish land. No one's going to be able to come there and replace the Israelites and flourish upon the land. By the way, the Samaritans have been here for a long time. Have they been flourishing? I think they have one or two settlements. They've been here long enough. They should have made something of it. One or two settlements. They have very low population. Why? Because they are imposters. Okay, they've never succeeded nationally, even though they've had a lot of time, and they even had advantage in Roman times when the Romans were massacring Jews. They didn't do so much to the Samaritans, who at the time were basically saying, no, we're not one of them. And even though, like we said before, they now have this shtick where they claim to be the tribes of Yosef and Menashe, you think God promised Bein Porat Yosef, the children of Yosef would be the most numerous. Indeed, the combined Shevet of Yosef was the biggest tribe upon Israelites entering the land of Israel. Okay, well more than 80,000. Well, it's well more above average size for a tribe, and even larger than the tribe of Yehuda. But even though they are supposedly, at least they claim to be descendants of Yosef, they have a very hard time reproducing. Okay, just to show, because it's a falsehood. Either way, so that's what the Bris Bein Basar is about. The land belongs to Abraham's descendants to the exclusion of everybody else. And we earn it by offering the korbanos. And if we lose the chance to do korbanos, we will not be on the land too long. Here, God is actually now introducing a new factor. It is true that Abraham was promised the land to the exclusion of all the others. But now, Abraham has done something that he had a lot of trouble with previous, and that was having children. Yishmael is now at this time 13 years old. As it says at the end of the parasha, it says that Ishmael was 13 years old. That means, halachically speaking, he has become an adult. Does bar mitzvah apply just to Jews? No. Bnei Noach also. The difference between a Noahide child and a Noahide adult, for the purposes of, let's say, legal responsibility, is bar mitzvah. Okay, it doesn't mean that they have the Torah to keep. It means they're now commanded to keep the mitzvahs of Bnei Noach. They're legally responsible. If a child ben Noach, for example, were to steal, so he is not to be punished. But a child, no longer a child, above the age of bar mitzvah, 13 years and 1 day, a ben Noach is halachically responsible for his own actions, and he was capable of receiving punishment for that. So at this point, Abraham now has a child whom he has every reason to believe is, for all intents and purposes, his heir. And don't forget, this child was brought into this world on the recommendation of his wife. It was his own wife who hatched this idea that Abraham should father a child by her maidservant. Okay, and this child seems to have been born in a miraculous manner, and his birth and name were prophesied by the angel. So he has a lot going for him. And now God is telling him, Abraham, if you wish to produce your real progeny, you first have to circumcise yourself. Circumcision, it's no coincidence that it is, I guess, performed on the organ of generation. There's a reason for that. Now Abraham will need to perfect his body and his reproductive capacity, and so will his wife, so that they could now produce the child who is the true seed. That is what's going on here. You have an example of a fellow who was converting to Judaism. He begins to learn about God, and he's actually committed, but he has yet to circumcise himself and accept the commandments in front of the Beis Din and immerse himself in the mikvah. So he is still non-Jewish, and he fathers a child. That child is his child, 100%. And then when he converts, he could father another child. That child is also his child. But now the first child is not considered his Jewish child. He has no relationship to his first child. Yes, indeed, from a biological and genetic perspective, they're both 100% his children. But from a halachic perspective, the child born to him after his conversion and circumcision, that's the one considered following his Jewish self. The other child is basically been made an orphan. Okay? So it's very surprising. That's basically what Abraham is being told here. You have a child until this point, but you need to circumcise yourself and start anew. In a year from now, gives you enough time to prepare yourself. In a year from now, you will be the father of your true descendants. Bris Milah is not a new covenant of performance that allows us to own the land. Bris Milah differentiates between the children of Abraham who is entitled to the land. To what extent? Yishmael is not entitled to the land. Even if he opted and it was considered to his credit that says twice, Ishmael on his own decided to have himself circumcised. He could have refused. So that's to his credit. He had himself circumcised. He is still not going to receive a portion of land, and he is not entitled to. So too, the children of Esav. Esav is a reject. The covenant only flows through Jacob, and that's what Bris Milah shows us. Esav removed himself, whatever it means. We'll see a shurim. We also have previous shurim explaining what that means. But that's what's going on here. This is not a new covenant. This is not changing the terms. This is more of a manner of us determining who has the right among the descendants of Abraham, who has the right to settle the place. So there shouldn't be Gentiles around here, these groups, and who has the right to actually come and sell land and keep the commandments here? The Jewish people, the ones who are the true descendants of Abraham. So there's nothing contradictory in these parshiot.